you everybody for being here today for our Tuesday tips with the Education Committee from the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors. I have a few announcements to make, but then we're going to jump into our program, and our topic today is fair housing. I will properly introduce our guest speaker in just a few minutes, but we're really excited to have Rob Fredericks from the Housing Authority here with us today. But let me start off with a few announcements. Usually we have a sponsor for these Education Committee Tuesday Tips meetings, and the sponsor gets several minutes to talk to you about their organization and what's coming up. But today, the association itself is sponsoring our luncheon. So we will have a giveaway, never fear. There will be a giveaway at the end of the meeting for a gift certificate to Alessia Patisserie. If you haven't been there yet, and I haven't, but I keep hearing great things about it. But that will be at the end of the meeting for all those who lasted out and are here till the end. But a couple of announcements from the association. This is our last Tuesday Tips of the year, and it is probably the last one that we'll be having by Zoom. The plan is to have these at the association office starting in January or February. Do not hold me to that, but that's the plan for now, assuming that all goes well. And we're looking into hybrid Zoom or in person, but for now the plan is that these meetings will be monthly in person at the association. One other announcement that Casey wanted me to make is that Howard Gates submissions, the submissions for the Howard Gates Award, the deadline has been extended to this Friday. So if you have submissions that you'd like to make for the Howard Gates Award, those need to be sent to Casey or dropped off in person by this Friday, the 19th. And speaking of awards, the last housekeeping announcement is that we are having the installation and end of year award ceremony in person this year. So that's very exciting since we got to do it by Zoom last year, and that will be held December 3rd at the Bacara. So new location. And same thing, see Casey for further information or to make your reservations. Those are our announcements. Let us go ahead and get started with our main event, our program today. As I mentioned before, our topic is fair housing. And today with us, we have Rob Fredericks. Rob is the CEO of the Housing Authority of the City of Santa Barbara. He has been with the Housing Authority since 1996 and has become and has been CEO since 2017. Rob also serves as a board member and officer of the Housing Authority's two affiliate nonprofits. They are Second Story Associates and Garden Court Incorporated. Rob's other civic commitments include he's immediate past president of the Pacific Southwest Region Council of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, and he's a board member and treasurer of the Housing Trust Fund of Santa Barbara County. He's also president of San Felipe Independent Living. I've had the pleasure of working with Rob on a couple of projects, and he is knowledgeable, accessible, professional, and he's here today to share his wealth of information about fair housing. And you know, when we talk about fair housing and affordable housing in Santa Barbara, sometimes it can almost feel like an oxymoron. There are a lot of challenges to be dealt with, and Rob is here to share his expertise in the field. So Rob, thanks very much for being with us. Oh, and before I turn it over to Rob, if you have questions, we will definitely have time for questions at the end. If you would like to put them in the chat as we go, just so that you don't forget them, we will take a look, but we will make sure that there's plenty of time for interactivity and questions after Rob's presentation. So Rob, thank you very much for being here with us today, and take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate the intro there, and thank you for having me here today, Casey and Sarah, to give a little presentation. And let me share my screen, see if I can do that here. Hold on one second. Okay, can everybody see my
Yes,
screen here? All
perfect.
right, so what I want to focus on today is the need for housing, why it matters to our community, and options for creating more affordable and fair housing in the community. And before I get into it, there might be questions about, well, who is the Housing Authority and what do they do? The Housing Authority was created over 50 years ago, just over 50 years ago now, by the city of Santa Barbara. And even though we were created by the city of Santa Barbara, we are a separate public agency from the city. We are a separate public agency, and we don't rely on the sales tax base or property tax base that the city does for their operations. We rely on our own retained earnings, as well as our federal grants that we operate. Many of you may have heard of the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, and given that you're realtors, you may also be property managers and deal with our housing authority or the county housing authority. There are two housing authorities in the county. There's our agency, which our jurisdiction is the city of Santa Barbara. And then there's the county housing authority, and their jurisdiction is everywhere else throughout the Santa Barbara County. So first of all, let's talk about why housing matters. And it matters to a community because it really is key to attracting and sustaining economic activity, and it anchors vital and inclusive neighborhoods, and it also promotes strong and resilient families, and it creates a more diverse and inclusive, equitable community. Unfortunately, there's not enough housing in Santa Barbara, but there's not enough nationwide. And I think it's always important when I talk to community groups to inform groups that it's not just Santa Barbara that has the housing issue. It's a nationwide problem. And I have up here on the screen, there's a national report that the Harvard Institute of Joint Studies does annually called the State of the Nation's Housing. There's actually a 2021 update to this study and I put on here the 2020 study that came out last fall. And the key takeaways from that study was that there's persistent unaffordability, there's growing racial disparities, there's widespread housing insecurity, and there are major barriers to ownership. There's a lack of nationally of a need of about 7.5 million affordable homes that are needed throughout the nation. And also nationally, 37.1 households are housing cost burdened, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing. And if you're paying more than 30% on housing, that means you're giving up other necessities that are necessary for your household. Could be health insurance, food, creating, food insecurity and other issues that you're giving up. And so many people nationally are giving up that just to keep a roof over their head. And many more are not able to keep a roof over their head because there isn't enough affordable housing. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many homeless across the nation. So what about California? Nowhere is the crisis more evident than our own state. We are the poster child for the housing need. I mentioned there's about a 7.5 million unit need deficit across the nation. Well, in California, we have about 3 million of those 7.5 million units are right here in California, where we need housing units. And of those 3 million, about 1.3 million are needed in terms of affordable housing serving low income. And because we don't have that, we have that supply demand issue, is that, the rents are skyrocketing, and renters need to earn about 2.9 times the state minimum wage in order to afford the average rent. And median rent has increased 40% just since the beginning of the year 2000. And yet median renter income increased only 8% in the same time period. And because of those supply demand issues creating the high cost of housing, we've had companies leaving California for states with less regulation. There's that part of it too, why they're leaving, but they're also leaving because of high housing costs and because organizations can't attract and retain employees. And recently, companies such as Tesla, HP, Oracle, Toyota, Charles Schwab, Jamba Juice have decided to move their headquarters out of California. And their reasons are the costs of doing business is too great, taxes, employee costs, and housing, of course. And here's just an example of what you can read in the LA Times and local papers. This was back from January of this year, where they noted that Southland median prices increased 10.1%. And the pace really hasn't eased recently. And here's a more recent article where, because of material costs, labor costs, new developments, developers need to have a return on their investment. New developers are having to have higher rents in order to get their return on costs met. And to do that, they need to add amenities to their properties. So they're more marketing to high-end renters. And that's something that I think we're seeing here in Santa Barbara as well. So, what exactly are we seeing in Santa Barbara, where in California, 1 in 3 households cannot pay the real cost of living due to high housing costs? Well, the same is true for Santa Barbara. People want to live in Santa Barbara. Look at this beautiful coastline. Who wouldn't want to live here with a temperate climate all year long, where no matter what time of the year, except for last week and a few other days where we have a little bit higher temperatures, usually it's about 73 to 75 degrees. People like living here, and it's a beautiful place to live.
Give it as a gift.
But because of that, again, we're bounded by the ocean on one side of us and narrow strip of land, and bounded up by the mountains on the other side. There's not a lot of developable land. So what happens is the demand far outstrips the supply, causing increased housing costs. The median home price year to date on the south coast of Santa Barbara, and that's stripping out Hope Ranch and Montecito, and this was through October 31st, is $1.6 million, just over 1.6 million. And I don't need to go over these costs with you. You're the professionals. You get this data. You know what it is. But yet the median income for a family of 4 is only $90,800. We've seen a slight bump on the median income, but still, folks earning that at median income of that amount for a family of 4, there's no way they can afford the median home price. And on the rental side, we're seeing a vacancy rate return to just about 1%, which is not sustainable. That's why we have UCSB renting out hotel rooms for students because there's not enough housing for students, and even with students, doubling and tripling up. And we have our people who come to us for affordable low-income housing, they don't get housing for several years because we don't get enough housing to help everyone. And we have 3,584 applicants currently on our wait list. And there are 887 homeless in the city of Santa Barbara. So that right there is a snapshot of the need for housing in Santa Barbara. And I mentioned that because there's not enough supply, you end up getting high demand where it's a landlord's market, which is a great thing for landlords. Here you can see this Isla Vista unit that's, I think, renting for just over $17,000 a month that's listed for. And that's because they can put multiple tenants in the unit. But that's kind of the reality we're living with now. And again, that's Isla Vista where high student demand is. But here's a downtown unit in Santa Barbara that's renting for $2,495 a month, and it's just out of sight for most people. That was a 1-bedroom, and how do people afford that? I don't know. But one of the issues it causes are you get more people who you have a jobs housing imbalance as well. So where you have people moving out of town or can't move in town, but they work in town. So you have a high commuter rate as well, where people, they get bipolar confusion of where do I work? Where's my community? Is it where I work, where I live? I spend most of my time where I work, and then the rest of the time in my car, and I don't have family time. So there are multiple issues that happen. Now, the Housing Authority, we've tried to do an admirable job of providing affordable housing for the community. That's been our mission. Our mission has been to create safe, affordable, and quality housing opportunities for families and individuals, while also promoting self-sufficiency and neighborhood revitalization. And you can see there, we've provided 1,377 units spread throughout the city in our just over 50-year history. So that's a pretty good job, but it's gotten tougher with developable land not being available. And early on, we developed public housing where HUD would just write us a check to develop affordable housing. They'd write housing authorities a check. Now go out and buy or build housing. And we did that successfully while the program was in effect, but because of bad actor housing authorities, I can't really blame it on bad actor housing authorities, but when you think of public housing, what do all of you think of? You think of those big monolithic high rises back east or in the Midwest that kind of just warehouse the poor. Now, we're a younger housing authority, and we learned not to do affordable housing that way. We fit our affordable housing into each neighborhood, and we're often the best looking housing authority. So Congress was fed up with giving money to housing authorities to build affordable housing, only to be decrepit a few years later and having to demolish those units. So with the Tax Reform Act of 1986, they created the low-income tax credit, housing tax credit program, where instead of writing checks to housing authorities, the IRS would offer up tax credits that would be available to developers of affordable housing to bring in private investors into the community. So housing authorities like ours, we looked at, well, we're not getting checks anymore from the federal government to build housing. How are we going to continue to meet the community's demand? Well, for the last 25 years, we've been actively involved in applying for those tax credits and for our new developments. And that's been the model of building affordable housing, is applying for tax credits. Now, the housing authority doesn't pay taxes. So what do we do with those credits that we are successful in applying for? We sell them to private investors who become our equity and partners in our affordable housing that we build. And so the equity partners, they purchase those credits for a 10-year period. And then at the end of that initial credit period, they want out. They've taken depreciation on the property, and they've gotten that dollar for dollar tax credit, and they no longer have an interest in being involved in those affordable housing developments. So we're able to buy the property for just $1 over debt. And what we typically do is structure the debt to where the debt that's owed on the property is just the debt that the city or the housing authority owes at the end of that 10 to 15-year period. So it's a model that works very good, but I'm going to show you on the next slide. It does brain damage, and it actually adds to cost. But what I want to show out while I'm still on this slide is that when we propose a new project, you often see comments in EdHat or other places that, wow, the housing authority has 25% of the affordable housing, of the overall housing stock, and we need to stop them. They're just empire builders. Well, we're not. The overall percentage that we have currently is just 5.7% of the rental housing stock of our developments. I wish we had 25%. Then we could probably say we've done a job and we can close our doors and go away, but we haven't. And that's where we need to do more work, because there's a lot of people out there that need help. But moving on, here's that complicated flowchart structure of who's all involved in one project, one affordable housing project. You have lawyers, you have attorneys, syndicators, local government, property managers, developers, the state, HUD, they're all involved, and it does a lot of brain damage. Where I mentioned before, we used to get a check from the federal government to say, here, go out and buy or build housing with this funding, and we'd be able to easily do it. But with this structure, you see, it makes it a lot more difficult, and there's a lot more soft costs involved that raise the per unit price of developments. Our last development, the per unit development was $550,000 per unit. That's the Gardens on Hope development next to the Chevrolet dealership. So it gets expensive, but we need that affordable housing. So, and this is the model that we use to do that. And this model also targets very low income, 60%. You have to be a household of 60% of area median income or below to qualify for low income housing tax credit developments. So we're serving very low income folks that even the tax credit rents are a stretch for them, but those are the people who qualify for these developments. I mentioned we've done a good job with that 1,000 and some units that we've developed, and we've spread it out throughout the city. And these blue dots that you see on the map are developments that we've developed throughout the city. A lot of it's downtown, because that's where your R4 development opportunities are, the correct zoning. But you can see we've developed in the Hope School District, up on the Mesa, City College area, the east side, the west side. And one of the things that I'm proud about of our agency that we've done is we've been able to really spread out the housing and have the developments we do fit in with the neighborhood. And oftentimes it's the best looking housing in that neighborhood. Now, how much more do we need? Well, let's go over that with looking at the impossible regional housing allocation that are allocated to the city of Santa Barbara's jurisdiction. And each year, the state or each 8-year period, the state requires an allocation of regional housing needs that our SBCAG then splits up into each jurisdiction to say, this is how much housing you need to plan for in order to provide for the theoretical need for that jurisdiction. And again, the city of Santa Barbara, here is the by income band, the units that are needed in the current planning period, 4,100 units. We've only achieved to date 1,087. And, you know, it looks bad, but I want everybody to know that most jurisdictions throughout the state do not meet their regional housing allocation needs. So that's why I call it the impossible arena, is that most jurisdictions do not come close. What I do want to point out is the moderate income range. That has been the least served population in Santa Barbara for getting housing that's affordable to them. Only 4 units have been provided in that moderate income range. That's 80% to 120% at very immediate income. Now, why is that? The reason is because below that is your low and very low income, the housing that we provide. We still haven't done enough of that, as you can see. We've only, for low income, only 12% and very low, 19.5. But also above the moderate range, you have the market rate that takes care of that, where people are somehow are able to pay those really high rental rates that are just seem out of sight to me. But the moderate income is what's been served the least, and that's an area that we're focusing on recently. With our commission has expanded our mission to serve that moderate income band. And you can see here, this screen is the next planning period that comes up in 2023, and you can see the differences. We have a lot more housing we need to provide for the demand. You can see the previous slide was 4,100. Now, this next planning period, we have to provide 8,001. It's gone up in every category that we need to provide housing for. It's just incredible. So, you know, I rack my brain is what are the constraints of providing housing in Santa Barbara? Well, I mentioned earlier, we're a built out community, a limited property selection, very high land costs, increasing construction costs. We've had our construction costs on our most recent development that we're getting ready to break ground on increased 25% just since the beginning of this year to now. Zoning, we have limited number of needed units because of zoning constraints. Now there's been SB 9 and SB 10 that's been passed at the state level that helps with that, but it's still very difficult with the zoning processes. And entitlement processing time, you've all heard of that it's very difficult getting a development through. The entitlement processing, so developers look elsewhere to develop housing. But there are some opportunities. I mentioned we're a temperate climate there, so there's always going to be demand there. The city has instituted, with their general plan update in 2013, the AUD program. They recently put in housing requirements for moderate income for new developments, ADUs, accessory dwelling units. They're also looking to go to a floor area ratio. That should also get more housing that's needed. We're also looking at adaptive reuse of existing structures, the downtown area, and alternative construction methods, modular units, airspace development above parking lots. And there's also a new trend of looking at public-private partnership with social impact investors. And that's what we're doing ourselves as the Housing Authority, is looking at what can we do as a public agency working with the city and bringing in private investors to help with that moderate and middle income where there's no subsidy source, there's no tax credits available for that period. So how can we do that? Well, the big thing is this social impact investment. And we're doing that at 400 West Carrillo. That's the Carrillo Castillo parking lot that I know Sarah knows very well. She lives in this district here. And it's a development we've been looking at with the city. The city owns the parking lot, and they're agreeing to donate it to the Housing Authority. So we'll own the land free and clear. So it takes the land cost out of the equation for developing. And yet we still have other costs, which I'll mention here in a moment. But here's the property. It's close to the freeway, which isn't ideal, but it's that tree canopied lot on the corner of Carrillo and Castillo Street. And why this site? One, again, it's city owned. It's accessible to downtown. It's an underutilized lot really right now, and the city needs more affordable housing across all income levels. And we're targeting this for moderate and middle income. And the rents here you can see for the moderate income units, those households between 80 and 120% AMI, they would be at this $1,600 per month for a studio, $1,900 for a 1-bedroom, $2,200 for a 2-bedroom, and we will be sprinkling in a few middle income units to help us pay for the moderate income units. And those will be quite a bit higher, but they're still affordable at the upper range of the middle income. For studios at this higher income range, $2,500, 1 bedrooms, $2,800, and 2 bedrooms at $3,200. Still less than your premium newer developments that are coming online with 2 bedrooms renting at $5,500 a month. Now, the reason why we need to sprinkle in the little bit of a middle income, we're looking at just about 10 to 15% of the units, of 63 of those units being at the middle income, is because of the cost. The cost to develop today, this development is targeted at just over $23 million. And that's with the direct construction costs estimated at almost $19 million. Then those soft costs at $3.2 million and developer fee of $900,000 for a total all-in cost again of just over $23 million. And we've been able to bring in an equity investor, a social impact investor that I mentioned, one that would typically require a much higher rate of return on their equity investment in an open market investment, because development is very risky, but they're willing to take a cut and only take a 5% return on their investment But in order to achieve that 5% return, we need to sprinkle in a few of those units at that higher income rent. So it's like providing for that true mixed income development, where you're going to have a few higher income earners with that moderate income workforce paying the lower income rent on the property. And again, right now we've drafted out 63 units on this development. We think it's a size that will work on the property with a 1-to-1 parking ratio that will impact very little on the neighborhood. And I know Sarah's going to hold our feet to the fire on that too. So we will do that. And I did just want to say, to end up here, that with this quote, that we shape our buildings and they shape us, and the architecture impacts the human outcome. And it's a Winston Churchill quote, actually, but it's one I like because it really moves me in how we at the Housing Authority take a great deal of care in how we design our buildings to fit into the neighborhood. And we're not just looking at low income anymore. We're also looking at that moderate income development and how we can do mixed income and truly help a broader range of Santa Barbara residents afford to retain their homes here and gain an affordable home. So that's kind of what we're all about. And that social impact model, that's what I wanted to really highlight today, because it's one that we're going to be focusing more and more on. And once we can show the Carrillo-Castillo test model, as you will, to the community that it works, we're going to look at other city-owned land to replicate that model, to provide for more moderate income. And if we can show that this works with the social impact investor, we'll be able to bring in hopefully that same social impact investor, but I would like to bring in other social impact investors as well. And I've been talking recently to the Santa Barbara Foundation about creating a fund for just that purpose, for land acquisition, if it's not a city-owned land, that we might be able to provide opportunity for, and to provide for a fair rate of return that provides for a community benefit and does a community good. So I'm hopeful on that front. I'm also trying to think of other measures that maybe we could look at for for additional funding for low-income housing, because in 2012, the state took away redevelopment agencies from us, and we used that funding quite a bit for land banking. And since that date, we haven't had that fund for taking advantage of purchasing land that would become available for affordable housing. But if we could create a local stream of ongoing funding source for affordable housing, I think that would be really beneficial as well. And, you know, I look at the transient occupancy tax as one thing that we may be able to look at. Now, I forget which measure it was. I think it was measure B that created increased the TOT and allocated a 2% to creeks. Well, how about if we not increase the TOT, but take a little bit more of that TOT that's not restricted to creeks, but take a similar amount to go towards affordable housing. If it truly is our community's #1 issue, then let's put our money where our mouth is, so to say, and create that ongoing source of revenue that's regulated, that says it will go to affordable housing. So those are my thoughts. I'm sorry if I've taken up so much time, but I'm ready to answer questions where I can. So
no apologies necessary, Rob. I think that's yeah, that was a great presentation and overview, and knowing, I felt like I knew a lot about the Housing Authority before you started, but I learned more about it. And then all of your examples were really great too. And I think the points that you ended with are really almost, the start of future conversations. And I think it's something for everyone, and especially the real estate community, to think about, because housing overall is, most of us on the call, that's our life in one way or another. And
yeah,
getting that balance back in balance, it behooves all of us. We do have a
great.
few specific questions though.
Okay.
And I'm going to start with one that was not on the general chat, but Pat Costello is asking whether the city or county can use eminent domain to take over an apartment building or something of that nature.
The answer to that is yes. Both the city and the Housing Authority, as a separate public agency, that is one tool we have available to us. We've only used eminent domain in friendly condemnations, what I want to call friendly, where we needed to where the owner would get certain benefits from that eminent domain, other than the purchase price for the property. They could get extended exchange deferrals rather than a 1031 exchange. They could take a 1033 exchange and bank their money longer without identifying a replacement property. So that's one benefit we're able to use as well. We don't like to use eminent domain where we're looked at kind of as the bully of going after a property. We like to negotiate with the sellers, but that is available. The one thing about an eminent domain is we don't get any breaks as the purchaser. We have to get appraisals on the property and pay that appraised price, the fair market price. So it's not like we can go in and pay a lower price just because it's eminent domain. That's why we like to offer other tools that we have available. Another tool, if the owner wanted to sell to us, if we are able to talk to the owner into selling to us, say 20% less than the appraised value, well, that 20% less, they can, if they're selling to the Housing Authority, they can take a charitable contribution on their taxes. If they have a tax liability, they can get a charitable contribution for that. So that's one other tool that's available as well. So.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the chat, Robert Hernandez was asking whether the Housing Authority can develop outside the city limits.
Yeah, what's interesting, so the Housing Authority is formed under the state health and safety code. And I don't have the code section with me, but a couple of interesting snippets. As a housing authority, it's amazing, under that Housing Authority law that we're formed under, only 20% of our housing stock has to be affordable. The rest could be very exclusive penthouse rentals. Of course, we would always be the opposite of that, but it's just interesting that that law allows for that. The law also allows for us to develop within a sphere of influence outside the city limits, which is typically 5 miles outside the city limits. Now, we would only do that if the county housing authority wasn't an active developer. The county housing authority, my colleagues there they're amazing. They're amazing developers of affordable housing. And we would defer to them first to say, hey, take this, here's a piece of property that's developable, that's available, look at it and go after it. And they often do, because they're great developers, but they've allowed us to purchase just outside the city limits. We just closed escrow a couple of weeks ago on Hollister Avenue, right across from what's it called? The Creek Bar and Inn there.
Creekside?
Creekside. There's that old motel there, 11 studio units that's been fixed up, and that's outside the city limits. But we felt it was great for our portfolio, and we sought the county housing authority's approval for us to purchase that, and they said, by all means, go ahead. So we just closed escrow on that. So, we would always, even if it's inside that 5-mile sphere of influence, we would always seek the county housing authority's approval first if they didn't want to go after it. So that's that.
So I'm curious about that. So for example, the example that you just gave, you just closed escrow on that property across from the Creekside, and we can probably all envision exactly where that is. So we know that the wheels of development do not move quickly. Is that the kind of property that you will, I don't know, what would your next steps be in deciding what to do with that property?
Yeah, so that property, we're planning to keep it as is for now. They're studio units, they're in good shape, and it's actually serving the majority of the renters there are that moderate income renter that, they're not paid enough for the new market rate rental units to afford that, but they can afford there. So we're planning to keep it as is. It's filling a niche in the market. I think if we ever look to redevelop that, it would be 10, 20 years from now, long range plans. So yeah,
okay.
On that, but you're right. The wheels take a long time to turn to get through development processes. And that's one of the reasons why we also look towards acquisition. And that's where it comes in for all of you. We're not tied to any certain broker or real estate agent in town. But if you have an opportunity for an apartment complex that's you think might make sense for the housing authority, send it our way. We might be interested, because currently there are some deals out there. Of course, some of the stuff we're looking at has some deferred maintenance, but it's actually cheaper to acquire than to build new. But we want to add, we need to add to the stock too, to more housing. So that's why we're not going to get out of the development business, even though it's really super expensive to develop these new developments. We're building additional housing at 116 East Coda. We call it Veracruz Village for those who are homeless, moving from homelessness, and it's only 28 rental units, and that's costing us about $20 million to build, because one of the reasons it's on such a small lot, it's the staging is going to take extra work, and I mentioned early on, that's the project that we had a 25% run up on our development costs from the beginning of the year to now, that we had to go back and fill the gap with the city. But we didn't want to turn back nearly $10 million worth of low-income housing tax credits that are very hard to get. And with the money that we're able to leverage from the city to get those tax credits, we feel it's worth it. And in the end, we get that additional housing as well.
Great. We have a couple more questions. I think one might be quick, one might be longer. What I think would be the quick one, and I could almost do the math myself maybe, but Trudy Carey was asking, how much will we be all in on the Carrillo project per unit without the land? And I'm sure you have to answer in a vague way, since we don't know whether the costs will go up between now and completion.
Right, because
But,
now, that's one of the things where we took so much time working on the project agreement and working with our investor on is it's going to be 3 years from now before we even break ground. And so what are the costs going to do between now and then? Now, our estimated cost on a per unit basis is about $365,000, but who knows between now and then what the costs are going to be. My eyes water when I compare what our development costs are now compared to 20 years ago, but that's just the nature of inflation and cost of living and everything else. And
those are the same kind of eye-watering that we all get when we look back at the woulda, coulda,
sales
shoulda, right? We could have bought that and that.
Yeah.
And then one more question. Marcella Simmons was asking both whether the housing authorities projects are identified by signage or in other ways, and then who manages the properties once they are completed.
Yes, so the housing authority properties are not really identified by signage. What you will see is going into the parking lots, a small sign that has our logo on it that talks about if you're going to park here, you need to park in guest spaces, or you need to be have a registered sticker with the housing authority. Otherwise, you don't know that they're housing authority properties, other than, as I mentioned, at least to me, they're better looking than most of your market rate multifamily developments that you see on the same block. For the managing of the properties, with the exception of Grace Village next to La Cumbra Plaza that we finished a couple years ago, and Gardens on Hope on the other side of La Cumbra, and Garden Court downtown. Those 3 properties are managed by different organizations. The rest of our 60 some properties throughout the city, the housing authority manages those properties directly. We have our own management, our own maintenance employees. It's what we do. And it's what we do well. We manage those properties, I feel, well, and handle neighborhood issues or neighbor issues with the properties. And again, we try and maintain those properties quite well for the neighbors. And not only because it makes us proud, but imagine us getting a track record of, well, they don't manage well, and look how bad those properties look. How would that be for us going in for our next development on being able to develop a property? So, yeah.
Yeah, I have to say, as you know, Rob outed me by mentioning that I live near the Carrillo Castillo lot, and you know, of course, as we've been talking about this over the years, I have kept my eye out for other properties. And you're right, the housing authorities projects downtown that I'm aware of, and others that I've toured throughout the city, really are an asset to their neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for a super informative presentation. It was great to have you as our guest and our presenter today. We really appreciate it. And then everyone probably saw the question was asked and answered, that this presentation will be available. It's being recorded, so it will be available in that way. And then Casey says it'll also be in the newsletter. Last but not least, before we all adjourn for our afternoons, Casey will be spinning the wheel, because we do have a gift certificate. Thanks to the association, someone will be winning a certificate to Alessia Patisserie. I know this is everyone's favorite part of the day. And the winner is Caitlin Boyle. So Casey and Caitlin will hook up and get that into your hands, Caitlin. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. Pat is reminding everyone there is a breakfast meeting on Zoom Thursday with fire information. And remember, Howard Gates submissions and installation luncheon at the Bacara. You can see Casey for all of those events as well. Thanks, everybody.